Okay, so this video is for kids who may or may not be able to finish the entire book or read the entire book. And what I wanted to do was create a summary of George's Secret Key to the Universe so that you kind of knew what each chapter was talking about. So this is kind of a supplemental video for all the other videos that I've done. So in chapter 1, we're introduced to our first character, and that's George. And George lives in a house with his parents. He's an only child, and he has a pet pig named Freddie. And in this chapter, we find out about George that his family doesn't like to have a lot of the extras that everybody else has. So they don't like to have electricity. They don't like to use computers and anything that's like a wash machine and a dishwasher and all of that stuff. They use old-fashioned type things, so like hand washing dishes, etc. So that's really important about this family because George does not have a computer. His pet Freddie happens to escape through the fence into his next door neighbors. And when we go to chapter 2, we find out that the next door neighbor is a man named Eric, and he has a little girl named Annie. And they are quite the opposite of his parents. So they have technology everything. As a matter of fact, he has this huge computer that he uses because he's a scientist, and he uses this computer to learn things about the atmosphere and outer space and the solar system. So this computer is called Cosmos. And the way that Cosmos works, we find out in chapter 3. Cosmos is a computer. When you press the enter key, which is the key to the universe, the enter key on the computer, Cosmos creates a window, and it's very descriptive. As a matter of fact, we can look at page, let me find it for you here, guys. This is into chapter 5. If you look at page 44, it shows you the window that Cosmos creates. And you can see things happening in this window in the universe. So one of the things that we find out about is the birth and the death of a star. And as you guys learned in science class, the sun is a star. So we find out how the sun became the main part of our solar system and how it was born and how long it will live, which is important for science things that we've been learning about. But anyway, if you continue on in chapter 6, George goes back to school, and he's at school, and he's really excited about this computer system, Cosmos, that he met. And Cosmos has shown him so many cool things, and he's so excited about it that he goes to school and he decides to sit at his desk and draw. And when he's drawing, his teacher, Mr. Reaper, is not very happy that he's drawing and not paying attention to him. So he goes over and he takes his drawing. And he asks George what this happens to be. And George mentions that it's a computer that does cool things and lets you see into the universe. And this really piques Dr. Reaper's interest and attention. And you'll see why in just a little bit. But he is definitely a main character in this book. So after Dr. Reaper finds out about the computer, we find that George is not necessarily liked by everybody in his class. He's on his way home, and he has these bullies, Ringo and his gang, who run after him and chase him, and he actually has to climb a tree to get away from them. And he's very scared when he's heading home that day because they're kind of after him, and he knows what's called this Ringo's ring of terror. And Ringo terrifies kids in the school. He is definitely the school bully. And so as he's chasing George home, when they get to George's house, this astronaut comes out of the house. And if you look at page 75, you can see that picture. And this astronaut is like just really scares them away from George. And George is kind of taken aback, like he has no idea who this is. We'll come to find out that in chapter 8, the astronaut is little Annie, Eric's daughter, and she came to save the day. So George gets away from the bullies leave, and Annie and George talk about Cosmos some more. And Annie tells George that she's actually been to outer space with her dad. And George doesn't believe her because she's already lied at one point earlier in the story. And George is like, no, you haven't. She's like, yeah, I have, and I'll prove it. So she brings up Cosmos. Now, this time, Cosmos doesn't just create a window to see into the universe. Cosmos creates a door that they can jump out into the universe. And so on page, I'm going to look for that picture. On page 84, you'll see both of them in their astronaut outfits, and they're headed out into the universe. Now, in chapter 10, Ringo and his gang are a little bit confused because they have no idea what has happened to George and Annie. They kind of disappeared. And Dr. Reaper picks on Ringo and his gang and kind of gets Ringo and his gang to do his dirty work. So Dr. Reaper is interested in this computer that George has and George knows about, but actually Eric has. It's not at George's house. And Ringo gets sent to find the computer. So when he gets there, though, by the time he gets there, and when he gets there, he notices that things have changed, that these two astronauts are no longer there. So in chapter 11, we find Annie and George out in outer space. They are literally floating around in space. Now, Cosmos, the computer, can track them in space, we find out in the book, and can bring them back at any point. They have like a radio to Cosmos that he can bring them back at any point. But while they are out in outer space, they are riding on a comet. And we find out about comets and what comets look like and feel like and the description of comets. And as they're riding on these comets, in chapter 12, they go past all of the planets in the solar system. And so chapter 12 really focuses on the different planets in the solar system and what they see on each of the different planets. It's very, very cool. And they see the Earth, and they see Saturn, and they see Jupiter, and they see all the moons of each of the planets. It is really, really neat. So we continue on this journey on the comet until something happens that's really kind of scary, and they need to get back. So when they come back, because they're going through the asteroid belt, which is actually kind of scary because little pieces of rock are hitting the comet, and they don't want to explode off the comet. So finally, they call to Cosmos, and Cosmos brings them back to the house. So when they come back to the house from out in the universe, they fall in through the portal, and Eric finds them. And Eric is very, very unhappy because he's not happy that George has abused the privilege of Cosmos. And George kind of takes all the blame for it. He doesn't blame Annie for taking him out in outer space. He takes all the blame, and he's okay with that. So Eric is not very happy with George. So George and Annie have to take a break from each other, which makes them both very, very sad. And that's happening in chapter 15. In chapter 16, we learn a little bit more about George's parents and how they petition for or go and protest for the rights of the planet and keeping the planet clean and making sure that we're treating the planet the right way. And along with that, we find that Ringo and his gang are out there at the protest, and they actually throw a pie in George's dad's face, which is no big deal, except it kind of brings us to where Ringo then goes with his buddies, and they realize this house. And if you look at this house on page 149, I'll give you a minute to get there. You can see this house. It's kind of a broken down old house. It doesn't necessarily look broken down in the picture, but it's an older house. It's kind of scary. All the kids don't want to go up and go near it. And when they finally do, there's a person on page 151, if you turn the page, that answers the door, and he's very scary looking. Come to find out, that's Dr. Reaper. So Dr. Reaper lives in this house. So Ringo and the boys come in, and they talk to Dr. Reaper, and he tells them about how he used to be a scientist as well, and that As a scientist, he helped to create this computer that would you could go out into the solar system to look for new life forms. And I wonder if you can figure out which computer that is. It's Cosmos. So we find out, actually knows Eric and used to work with Eric to build this computer. But now Eric has the computer and Dr. Reaper wants the computer. So he comes up with this idea with Ringo and his buddies that they're actually going to steal the computer from Eric's house. Kind of crazy. Meanwhile, George is at school. George gets his feelings hurt again by Ringo and is headed home. And when he's headed home in the rain, he ends up at Eric's house because he's very upset that he can't see Annie and very upset that he can't hear more about Cosmos. So he walks home, and we're on page 180 in chapter 20. And when he walks home, he comes to Eric's house, and Eric has, let me back up 1 minute. Guys, I missed a really important part. In the chapter before, Dr. Reaper gave an envelope to George to give to Eric. And we don't know what's in the envelope, but it's definitely in George's possession, and he's supposed to give it to Eric. But that's very important. I shouldn't have forgot that very important fact. But when he gets to Eric's house is full of scientists, and they're having a very big debate about whether or not they should continue to put their efforts in finding new life forms or to work on life forms on our planet. And George actually pays attention to this meeting. He sits in this meeting and he pays attention to the meeting, and he talks with all the scientists and gives his information about whether or not they should be trying to go find new life forms out there using Cosmos, or whether they should be using all of their efforts in working on making the Earth a better place for all of us to live on. So fast forward a little bit. They're cleaning up after the party. And George gives the note from Dr. Reaper to Eric. And Eric gets very excited. Now, we still don't know what is in the letter, but Eric gets very excited about the letter, and he goes over and he puts coordinates into Cosmos, and he heads out into the universe. And once George sees the letter, he knows that something isn't right. Then he happens to see on page 204, if you guys want to look for page 204, the letter is actually there, and it says, "Dear Eric, I understand that your long-standing quest to find new planets to inhabit isn't over. I wanted to draw your attention to a very particular planet I happen to have found. It's roughly the size of the Earth and lies at about the same distance from its star as Earth is from the sun." So this is where Eric has headed. But George figures out that that is not where a planet is. As a matter of fact, that is where a black hole is found in the atmosphere. In outer space. So there is a black hole in outer space that Eric is headed right for. And if you don't know anything about black holes, there's actually a lot of information about black holes here in this book. But George tries to go out into space to save Eric. Eric's not very happy about that. And when George gets to him at chapter 24, he tells George he has to go back. And George tries to warn him about the black hole, but Eric doesn't want to listen because he thinks there's another planet out there. Look on page 217. There's a good illustration there. You'll see George and Eric on top of a comet or a meteor, and you'll see the black hole. It's a space of nothingness, and it draws everything in. And once you get into a black hole, you can't get out. Well, at least that's what we thought. But believe it or not, there is a book that was written by Eric, and this book is exactly about getting out of black holes. It says what you need to know about black holes. One of them is, what is a black hole? How is a black hole made? How can you see a black hole? Falling into a black hole. and then getting out of a black hole. In chapter 26, guys, this is his book. And it details all of the things that he learned when he was learning about black holes. So now they know how to get him out of the black hole. Except that while they were out in space, while Eric is out in space, Reaper tries to steal the computer. He has Ringo go to the house and try to take the computer. And then when he has the computer, it doesn't work very well. So George comes up with a plan. He has to get this computer back from Reaper in order to get Eric back from the black hole in outer space. So he decides he's going to give a talk at his science fair because Reaper is going to be one of the judges of the science fair, and he's going to talk all about Cosmos and how to make it work. Because while Reaper has Cosmos, he has no idea how to make Cosmos work. The secret key to the universe is hitting the enter key on the keyboard, but nobody knows that except for Eric, Annie, and George. So George decides he's going to give a speech at his science fair, and he enters the science fair. And when they are at the science fair, Reaper comes to the science fair to judge. But because he's there, George and Annie escape and go to Reaper's house and steal back Cosmos. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? And when they steal back Cosmos, they're able to hit the enter key, open up the universe, and get Eric back, which is so important because if not, Eric would be dead, lost in outer space. But they are able to get him back. And then, because they're able to get him back, they have to get back to the science fair so that Reaper doesn't know that they took the computer. Oh, this is like the climax of the book, the most exciting part. Very, very exciting. So when they get back to the science fair, George gives his speech. Everybody loves it, and George wins a computer, which is a big deal because George's parents don't want George to have a computer. But in the end, George's dad lets him have it. So George and Annie have kind of saved the day. The computer was stolen. Eric was lost in space. They retrieve the computer. They give the talk at the science fair. Eric comes back. George wins a computer, and all's well that ends well. It's actually a very cute little story. Now, there is in the back some questions and answers that they did with some of the with the authors, which I think it's very interesting. And then there's some experiments that you can do, et cetera, et cetera. So a cute little book all about how a little boy gets thrown into the universe, learns firsthand what it's like to ride on a comet, see an asteroid belt, pass all the planets that we've learned about in science class, and then gets to save one person who means a lot to him, Eric, and gets to defeat the bad guy, Dr. Reaper, and save the day. So I hope you've enjoyed my little synopsis or summary of George's Secret Key to the Universe. And if you don't get a chance to read all of it, if that doesn't intrigue you enough to read all of it, maybe at least skim through and look at the pictures so that you can see what we're doing. All right. Have a great day, guys.